The new college football playoff rankings are out, and Notre Dame is at number 9 for the third week in a row. At this point, everything is still on the table. The Irish could host a playoff game, they could hit the road in round 1, or they could even get left out. We're covering it all on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish for the last 5 seasons. I really appreciate you being here on Wednesday, November 26th, and thanks as always for making this your first watch or listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And before we dive in, please take a second to make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. The latest college football playoff rankings are officially here, and Notre Dame is at number 9 for the third consecutive week. And today, we are going to unpack why the Irish are ranked where they are and what the committee really thinks about them. Plus, we'll get into how the updated bracket shapes their playoff path and which rivalry week results could help or hurt Notre Dame in a big way. Then I'm going to tell you which teams to root for this weekend and make my own predictions for what is about to unfold. But first, let's take a look at the Week 14 college football playoff rankings. Here's how the top 15 shakes out. After a pretty chalky weekend in college football last week, there wasn't a ton of movement, but there were some notable shifts. So Ohio State stays at 1, followed by Indiana, Texas A&M, Georgia, and Texas Tech at number 5. Oregon moved up 1 spot to number 6 after their win over USC. Ole Miss is now at 7, following that move with Oregon. Oklahoma is still at 8, Notre Dame at 9, Alabama at 10, BYU at 11, and Miami moved up 1 spot to 12th after their win this past weekend over Virginia Tech, and then Utah moved down a spot. I believe that they are penalizing Utah for honestly just getting ran all over by Kansas State. Yes, Utah had to come back and win that game, and they got the win, which is impressive, but they did not look very good, especially on defense. Vanderbilt is at 14. Michigan moved up to 15. USC fell down to 17, and then Pitt is back in the top 25. They are at 22. So Notre Dame's best win in USC takes a hit, but now that Pitt is back in the top 25, Notre Dame has 2 wins over teams who are currently ranked. So if the playoffs were to start today, this is how it would look. In the first round, you would have, I believe it's Tulane going up against Texas Tech in that 12-5 matchup. Tulane representing the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champion. And then you'd have Notre Dame traveling to Norman to take on Oklahoma. And then the 11 seed, which would be the ACC champion, they would go to Autzen and play Oregon at Autzen Stadium in Eugene, I guess I should say. They're going to go to Eugene and play Oregon at Autzen. And then Alabama would hit the road to Oxford to take on Ole Miss in the first round. And then the winner of Notre Dame, Oklahoma would then get the 1 seed. The winner of Alabama, Ole Miss would get the 2 seed. And the ACC champ in Oregon would get the 3 seed. And then Tulane, Texas Tech would get the 4 seed. So right now, Notre Dame is in a really good spot. The fact that they did not move at all is not a big surprise considering Notre Dame just flat out embarrassed Syracuse. But the most important thing in all of this is that now Miami is ranked in the same pool, because the way that they do it is they rank teams 1 through 4, then 5 through 8, then 9 through 12, and they compare those teams. Notre Dame and Miami are now in the same pool. Before, Miami fans were calling conspiracy that the committee was purposely putting teams in between Notre Dame and Miami so they wouldn't have to look at head-to-head, but that is no longer the case. They are in the same pool, and the committee chairman had this to say about Notre Dame and Miami. He said Notre Dame and Miami were compared this week, but they were compared in the same pod as Alabama and one-loss BYU, and the committee still feels that Notre Dame is a complete team. He also went on to mention that head-to-head is just one data point and explained that they believe Notre Dame has been the most consistent program, especially as of late, but Miami is a team on the rise, and they can't be ruled out either. Heather Dinich, the analyst for ESPN, who is very well connected with the entire playoff committee, put it a little bit more bluntly. She said, quote, "Those people in that room think Notre Dame is better than Miami, period." So there you have it. Yes, Miami won week 1, but that was back in August. And while I still believe head-to-head truly matters, I think that you have to recognize that a game that was played at the end of August and a game that's played in November is going to be looked at a little bit differently. And that is the case with Notre Dame and Miami. That being said, I still don't want to be in a situation where it comes down to Notre Dame and Miami for the last at-large spot. Miami is still eligible to make the ACC Conference Championship if a couple things go their way this weekend. So there is a possibility where they don't even need to be in a debate with Notre Dame. They just might make it to the ACC Championship. If they win that game, which they likely would because they are the best team in the ACC, then they would get that automatic berth, and then we wouldn't even be having this discussion anymore. But if it does come down to Notre Dame and Miami for that last at-large spot, the heat is going to rise, and I just don't want Notre Dame to be in that position because even though they said that they looked at head-to-head right now, it would be a little bit different if it just came down to those two teams, and Miami would obviously have the tiebreaker. So if we look at the FanDuel odds here, Notre Dame's playoff odds are minus 950, which is really good, right, to make the college football playoff. But they have gone down significantly. Last week, I told you on the show, they were as high as minus 4,000 to make the college football playoff on FanDuel. And I even said in the moment, I don't understand why it's that high because I could still think of multiple scenarios where they don't make the playoff. And if the odds are going to be minus 4,000, that suggests that they are a complete lock. And maybe they still will end up getting in the playoff. But I think minus 950 is a more accurate reflection of where Notre Dame stands in the college football playoff race. So I know some people are going to see that and they're going to get concerned that it's now minus 950 and it's dropped such a significant amount, but it's still a pretty good number, right? Notre Dame is still very likely to make the college football playoff. And looking beyond just making it in, they are tied for the sixth best odds to make the national championship with Texas Tech at plus 550, and they're right behind Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Georgia, and then Oregon, who moved up ahead of them this week. They're also tied for the fourth best odds to win the title with Georgia and Oregon. So still, the people out there in Vegas who put a lot of money on this still think very highly of Notre Dame. So if the playoffs started today, they'd obviously be in. And if chalk plays out and all the teams we expect to win end up winning, Notre Dame is probably going to be in the playoff. It's going to be close, right? And I think there's still going to be some results that will happen over conference championship weekend that could seriously impact Notre Dame's playoff race. But right now, they're in a good spot because if it ended today, they're in. And if everything works out kind of how we expect, they're still probably going to be in. But the most important thing here, and I've been saying this for weeks, is that the playoff committee believes that Notre Dame is an elite team. We can all admit Notre Dame's playoff resume isn't bulletproof. Like, we could poke holes in it, and all the other opposing fans are certainly doing that. But the committee watches Notre Dame, and they see a championship-level team. I'm not saying that Notre Dame has a bad resume, but I'm just saying if you really wanted to dive in, you can poke holes in it. But we can debate resumes, but I don't want to debate who's the best team in college football or who is among the best teams because I think Notre Dame has proven it on the field week after week that they are truly an elite team and they're playing their best football at the perfect time. And the fact that head-to-head is already being discussed is a good thing too because they're already taking that into account and they still have Notre Dame 4 spots ahead of Miami. And as we sit here today, Notre Dame could still host a playoff game because if Oregon loses to Washington this weekend, I would expect Notre Dame to jump them. Or if Oklahoma were to somehow lose to LSU, Notre Dame could then jump up to the 8th spot there. And I was considering if Georgia were to lose to Georgia Tech, would they move behind Notre Dame? I'm not as sure about that as I am with Oregon and Oklahoma, but it's a possibility. And if somehow West Virginia pulled off an improbable upset and they beat Texas Tech this weekend, would Notre Dame jump Texas Tech? I would say probably. So there's still some things that could shake out here where Notre Dame could host a playoff game, but they're still not a lock to get into the college football playoff. And all the scenarios that I went over last week are still in play because none of the teams currently in front of Notre Dame are guaranteed to play each other. So there is a chance they will all keep winning. If that happens, you've got to worry about the teams behind them. For example, if BYU wins the Big 12 championship over Texas Tech, and let's say BYU and Texas Tech both win this upcoming Saturday, BYU would then be in the college football playoff as the automatic qualifier, as the Big 12 conference champion, and I think Texas Tech would be in as well. I don't think they would eliminate Texas Tech from the college football playoff as a one-loss regular season team if they were to end up losing the conference championship game. I just don't see that happening. And if Alabama were to beat Auburn, and then they beat Texas A&M in the SEC championship, they would then jump Notre Dame, and the Irish would be on the cut line at 10. In that scenario, if Notre Dame stays at 10, they still get in the college football playoff. But if they are 10, that is the last spot for an at-large bid, and that's where the Miami debate could be at the forefront for that last possible spot. And then we also have to consider if Michigan were to beat Ohio State, that's another two-loss team that Notre Dame would be compared to, and Michigan would have the best win of anyone in the sport if they go out there and they beat Ohio State for the 5th year in a row on Saturday. Yes, it's at home, but I think that they would move way up in the rankings, and they could potentially jump Notre Dame. So that's where Notre Dame stands after the latest college football playoff rankings, but the Irish could still use some help. Their playoff path now runs straight through rivalry weekend, and there are some matchups that could swing everything. So let's go through exactly who Notre Dame fans need to root for and why next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. So for my pick tonight, I'm not going to give you an NBA pick because it's still a little bit early, and lately my NBA picks have not really gone that well. So you know what? I'm going to look at the Heisman Trophy odds. So right now, Jeremiah Love is third at plus 450. He's behind Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback of IU, and he's behind Julian Sain, the quarterback of Ohio State. But you know what? Give me Jeremiah Love. I think he's going to have a big game against Stanford on Saturday, and I'm hoping that Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sain don't play all that well in the Big Ten Championship, and maybe that'll be enough to vault Jeremiah Love into the leader spot, and he ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Thanks again for joining us here today. We really appreciate your support and helping Locked On become the #1 sports podcast network. So this weekend, it's rivalry week. It is one of my favorite weekends of the entire year. There are so many great college football games, although I got to admit, it is a little bit bittersweet, right? Because for as fun as these games are going to be on Saturday, it is the last week of the regular season. Even though we still got the conference championships and the playoffs and plenty of more football that we get to watch here in the next coming months, we're not going to have a full Saturday slate quite like the one we're going to have this weekend. But the games actually start on Friday, and we got some good ones. So I'm going to give you your full rivalry weekend rooting guide. I'm going to tell you the matchups you need to know, who you should be rooting for, because the results of these games could seriously impact Notre Dame's playoff hopes. And we begin with the Egg Bowl on Friday. And look, if you're not that familiar with the Egg Bowl, the game between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, if you haven't really tuned into that one before, I'm telling you, make sure you are glued to the television on Friday, because that game always has some chaos. And now you've got the Lane Kiffin saga. Is he going to stay at Ole Miss? Is he going to go to LSU? Is he going to become that coach at Florida? Apparently, we're going to find out after this game. But the stakes for this game are legit. Like, Ole Miss probably has to win this game if they want to make the college football playoff, and Mississippi State has a chance to eliminate their arch rival from the playoffs and then send Lane Kiffin to a different school. So there is going to be so much on the line on Friday, and Ole Miss is favored by 6.5 points. And to be honest with you, I have no idea what to expect from this game, but I'm telling you, Notre Dame fans, you should be rooting for Mississippi State, because if Ole Miss is out, Notre Dame is going to move up to 8. They have a little bit more cushion between the 8 spot and the last at-large bid, and they could end up hosting a game. So if Mississippi State were to be able to pull off that upset at noon Eastern on Friday, Notre Dame would be sitting pretty, more than likely, for the rest of the weekend, so long as they obviously handle their business against Stanford. Next up, noon on Saturday, Ohio State at Michigan. I know this is going to be painful, but we're all Buckeyes this weekend. I do not want to deal with the 10-2 Michigan team, who, like I said, would have the best win in the country if they were able to upset Ohio State on their own home field. Right now, Ohio State is favored by 9.5 on FanDuel. They should win this game, but they should have won last year's game, probably by a lot. They were 3-touchdown favorites at home against a Michigan team who had Davis Warren as their starting quarterback. Do you remember Davis Warren? Probably not, because he wasn't any good. Well, it didn't matter. He still somehow upset Ohio State on their own home field, and then Ohio State ended up responding by playing like a super team the rest of the way. They ended up winning the national championship, but still, the fact that they lost to Michigan, to me, makes me believe anything is possible on Saturday. Michigan looked better last week after 3 pretty uninspiring performances when they knocked off Maryland. They needed a game-winning field goal to beat Northwestern the week before that, and they beat Purdue by 5 prior to that win over Northwestern. And for Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate missed last week's game. I'm assuming it was load management and college football, and they're going to be ready to go on Saturday. But for Notre Dame, you're rooting for Smith and Tate to be on the field, because if Ohio State beats Michigan, then Michigan is no longer even part of the conversation. So who knows with this game, right? You think Ohio State is going to win, but considering how this series has gone the last 4 years, anything can happen. All right, then you've got Miami at Pittsburgh on Saturday. This one is obvious. Let's go Pat Narduzzi and the boys. Miami is favored by 6.5, but it's looking like it's going to be a cold weather game on Saturday. A high of 35 degrees. I think that weather forecast certainly favors Pitt. I do have a lot of concerns about how Pitt's offensive line is going to hold up against Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor, because we saw how Notre Dame's front seven just completely whipped Pitt's offensive line for that entire game. I'm inclined to believe that Miami's defensive line is going to be able to do the same, but I think you can hope that Carson Beck turns the ball over a lot as the quarterback of Miami, especially in those types of conditions. I mean, they didn't play away from Florida for like the first 2 months of the season, and then they traveled to Dallas, Texas to take on SMU. So they haven't gone that far north this season. If they get rattled by the weather, which happens sometimes with Miami teams, and Mario Cristobal could set himself up for another November collapse, maybe Pitt pulls off the upset. If they do, Miami fans are no longer going to be in your mentions. We're not going to hear about head-to-head anymore, because they would be eliminated. Also, keep an eye out for Oregon at Washington. If Washington pulls this off, Oregon could be out of the playoff, or they're going to be on the fringe at least. And I do think Notre Dame would jump them. Oregon is favored by 6.5, but Washington, I never really know, because they're like a pretty good team. They didn't get blown out by Ohio State. They hung tough, but that game was really never in doubt. They got beat pretty bad by Michigan, and then Washington somehow lost to Wisconsin 13-10. So I'm not sure if they have the offense to keep up with Oregon, but Dan Lanning did lose twice to Washington in the same season. Now, granted, Kalen DeBoer was the coach and Michael Penix Jr. was the quarterback, so slightly different circumstances this go around, but the fact that they're only favored by 6.5 should tell you something. Plus, this game is at Washington. Washington has a really strong home field advantage, but if Washington were to be able to get this win, that would be great for Notre Dame. Then you have the Iron Bowl, Alabama at Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And if Auburn pulls off this historic upset, that would eliminate Alabama from the college football playoff, because it would be Alabama's third loss of the regular season, and then Georgia would take their spot in the SEC championship game. So Alabama wouldn't even have a chance for the automatic bid. And right now, Alabama is favored by 5.5. This would be massive for Notre Dame if Auburn were somehow able to pull this off. It looks like they're going to start Ashton Daniels, who actually sat out last week so that they could preserve his redshirt for the season. Deuce Knight, you might have heard that name before, made his first career start for the Auburn Tigers. He had 6 total touchdowns in that game. He had 4 rushing touchdowns before he even threw a passing touchdown. I understand that it's Mercer, it's an FCS school, but still, he's a really dynamic player. And even if he's not going to be starting on Saturday because of Daniels is back, I would expect Deuce Knight to be part of the game plan. Use him as a running back. I don't care. Get the ball in his hands. The way things have been trending for Auburn, it feels like they're probably going to be in it in the fourth quarter, and then they blow it in excruciating fashion, because we've seen that from them time and time again this season and in past Alabama-Auburn games, like a couple years ago when Jalen Milroe hit Isaiah Bond in the corner of the end zone on 4th and long. Nick Saban and Tommy Rees called that play the Gravedigger. Well, they somehow won that game. Maybe Auburn gets on the right side this go-around. Then you've got LSU at Oklahoma. If LSU wins, Oklahoma is likely eliminated. That would be their third loss of the regular season. But Oklahoma is favored by 10.5. The over-under is a whopping 36.5. I could see this game ending in like a 10-7 final score. This is probably going to be a truly painful watch, because you have an elite defense in Oklahoma going up against another really good defense in LSU, and they both have terrible offenses. But when you look at these matchups, when you look at Ole Miss at Mississippi State, Miami at Pittsburgh, Oregon at Washington, Alabama at Auburn, LSU at Oklahoma, Notre Dame just needs one of those upsets to happen. And they also need Ohio State to take care of business. But if they get one of those upsets, they will be in great shape. Then there's a couple other games that I'm keeping an eye on, not necessarily crucial to Notre Dame's playoff path, but it would be nice if Texas A&M beat Texas, because then that loss to Texas A&M looks better, and Texas wouldn't have any argument as a 3-loss team in the SEC. If Georgia Tech somehow beat Georgia, like I said earlier, maybe Notre Dame could jump Georgia. I don't think Georgia Tech is getting in as an at-large at this point, especially after their blowout loss to Pitt last week, but maybe Notre Dame could vault them, although Georgia's favored by 12.5, so I don't really see that happening. If Tennessee were to beat Vanderbilt at home, Tennessee is favored by 2.5. I don't think it drastically changes anything for Notre Dame, but it removes another two-loss team from the equation because there's a chance that Notre Dame and Vanderbilt could end up with the same regular season record. Do I think Vanderbilt has any chance of jumping Notre Dame with their win over Tennessee? Not really, unless they won like 150-0, but one less two-loss team is a good thing for Notre Dame. And then lastly, UCLA at USC. Notre Dame cannot afford for USC to have another loss. They had their third loss of the season this past weekend against Oregon. They only dropped to 17. Notre Dame needs that needs that win over USC to look better. And if they lose to UCLA, they're going to drop out of the top 25, and that game doesn't really count for anything. Would that be the difference between Notre Dame getting in and not? I doubt it, but still, for the sake of their resume, you want the Trojans to knock off the Bruins. All right, that is the full rooting guide. Now it's time to put my money where my mouth is. Rivalry weekend always brings some chaos, and I've got a couple predictions that could blow this playoff picture wide open. Let's dive into how I think it all plays out right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. College football is in full swing, and I could not be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It is the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Gametime, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. The app made it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seat before buying, and I love the zone deals too. Pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. All right, so I just gave you the full rooting guide for this weekend. It's rivalry weekend. You're going to be watching so much college football. Now you know exactly who to root for. But how is it going to play out? Well, to start, I think Notre Dame is going to run away from Stanford. It's probably not going to be as easy as the game against Syracuse or even Navy because I think the Cardinal have been playing better in recent weeks. But I expect Notre Dame to win pretty easily. I'm going to talk more about that in the preview show that's going to come out tomorrow. Now, as for the rest of the college football world, I am far less confident as to what to expect. We have not experienced that much chaos in college football this year. We really haven't. Like the fact that we have 3 undefeated teams going into the last weekend is not what most people expected. In the NIL and transfer portal era, we don't really have super teams anymore, although I think you can count last year's Ohio State team as a super team in the college football playoff. But I don't think there's a super team this season. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe one of those undefeateds just end up dominating the playoff here. But there just hasn't been nearly as much chaos across the sport. Like I think Steve Sarkisian said before the season, we're never going to see a team go 16-0 because there's so much more parity across the sport. Talent is more widely distributed, and the conference schedules are a little bit harder. I would counter that, though, by saying, well, with so many teams in these conferences like the Big Ten and like the SEC, some teams get really easy schedules, and then some teams get burned by having really difficult schedules. Like there is a serious imbalance when it comes to college football schedules. But maybe that could all change during rivalry weekend. It could also be a repeat of last week where no one in the top 14 lost a game. So let's get into some predictions here. Notre Dame would certainly move up if either LSU, Washington, or Mississippi State were to pull off an upset this weekend. They might even move up if Georgia Tech or West Virginia pulled off stunning upsets. And they no longer have to worry about head-to-head with Miami if Pitt somehow knocked off Mario Cristobal and the boys at home. They would feel a lot better about their chances if Ohio State won, and probably Auburn won as well. But they really just need one team out of Washington, Mississippi State, LSU, Pitt, or Auburn to feel safe. And if any one of those teams win, I feel like the Irish are probably good to go. It's not certain, but if they get one, they're going to be in really good shape. So with so many different scenarios, what's going to happen? I think it's mostly chalk, to be honest with you. But the Irish will get one of the big wins they need. If I had to go ahead and pick right now, I'm taking Auburn to knock off Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Auburn has had so many chances this season to pull off a big upset, and they have come up short time after time. But they've been getting a lot better play from the quarterback position as of late. They were starting Jackson Darnold for most of their big games early on in the season. Jackson Darnold, at one point, was a 5-star recruit. Notre Dame was after him pretty hard. The problem with Jackson Darnold is he's a quarterback and he's incapable of throwing the football. It's kind of important at that position. Since they made the switch to Ashton Daniels, and then last week when they had Deuce Knight fill in for a game so that Ashton Daniels could preserve his red shirt, that offense looked a lot better. And they always had a good defense. Auburn pretty much always has a great defense with NFL dudes all over the place, but they don't really know how to win. And for most of the season, they did not know how to move the ball on offense because they were so restricted with their quarterback. But with Ashton Daniels and Deuce Knight, I think they're going to pull it off. Let's go through Auburn's schedule this year. They had Oklahoma on the brink, and they had some absolutely terrible calls go against them. They lost by a touchdown in that game. And then after the fact, the SEC conference came out with a press release basically apologizing to Auburn because they botched some critical calls that badly. Great. Thanks, guys. The result is still the same. Auburn lost to Oklahoma. They also hung with Texas A&M all game. They ended up losing by 6. They never took the lead or anything, but they only lost 13-10 in that matchup. Auburn was about to go up 17-0 on Georgia in the second half, but they got screwed on a review where they fumbled at the goal line going into the stadium. I thought the ball had crossed the plane. I thought they were going to go up 17-0. They didn't. The refs ruled it was a fumble. Georgia gets the ball. They end up winning and covering 20-10. Auburn was also up a touchdown against Missouri in the fourth quarter. They lost that game by 6 points. They went into overtime against Vanderbilt with Ashton Daniels as a starter. This was not a Jackson Arnold game, and they lost by a touchdown. This team has been so close so many times, and they always come out on the wrong end. And then they've come up short in the Iron Bowl at home, like when they had the Gravedigger play to Isaiah Bond, and then when they had Bryce Young go all the way down the field over 90 yards in the last play of the game to score the go-ahead touchdown. That was back when Brian Harsin was the coach of Auburn. Auburn has not beaten Alabama since 2019, but you know what? I think they get it done on Saturday in Jordan-Hare. If that happens, Alabama eliminated. Notre Dame stays at number 9, but then I think Miami would ultimately get to the 10 spot because I think BYU is eventually going to lose in the Big 12 championship game. I don't have enough faith in Mississippi State against Ole Miss, even with all the Lane Kiffin drama. I think Ohio State's finally going to get the monkey off their back and beat Michigan, break that streak, and I would love it. Man, I would love it if Pitt were to knock off Miami. I just don't believe Pat Narduzzi is capable of doing something that would benefit Notre Dame as much as that would benefit Notre Dame. And I think Oregon is probably going to blow out Washington. If it's not a blowout, I don't really think Washington is ever going to have a chance late in that game. And LSU is just not a good football team. They're not going to beat Oklahoma. I could see Vandy getting the upset over Tennessee, which, again, could lead to an interesting debate. I don't think it's going to change anything for Notre Dame. But if everything goes how I think it will go, we might get Notre Dame and Miami in the college football playoff, and that could be a lot of fun. Would they play each other? Unlikely, but overall, the biggest difference for Notre Dame this weekend is going to be Auburn. So go Tigers. Folks, it should be a great weekend for college football. I simply cannot wait. And now you know who to root for. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Irish. Thanks as always for tuning in and making this your first watch or listen of the day. And before you head out and get back to your holiday travels, or if you're getting ready for a big night out on Thanksgiving Eve, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like the video, and leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. I'm going to be back here tomorrow, bright and early, on Thanksgiving morning with a full preview of Notre Dame's regular season finale against Stanford. There will not be a Friday mailbag this week because of the holiday, but enjoy your Thanksgiving, travel safely, and I'll see you tomorrow.